So we'll get underway. Talofa lava, my name is Ana Masolofa, here with the Permanent Mission of Samoa to the United Nations, based in New York. Thank you for joining us today as we start this first webinar of the Friends of the Action Agenda. Plastic pollution is an accelerating global environmental challenge that poses significant risks to livelihoods, economies, human and animal health, and the environment. However, this problem is now not a new one. For decades, the unsustainable production and consumption, as well as the mismanagement of plastics, have overburdened waste management infrastructures across the globe, especially in SIDS, and polluted our lands, rivers, and oceans. Traces of plastics have been found in some of the most remote parts of the world, and even in our bodies. We've seen this in studies that have come out recently. This is a highly pervasive transboundary threat that requires actions by all levels of governments and stakeholders. By virtue of UNEA Resolution 514, the international community is currently engaged in the negotiation of an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, with the goal to complete this important work by the end of 2024. UNEA Resolution 514 prescribes for the instrument to include provisions on, among other things, the initiation of a multi-stakeholder action agenda. The Friends of the Action Agenda was then initiated to facilitate discussions with governments and stakeholders to inform the development of an action agenda under the instrument in order to continuously drive ambitious and progressive actions across multiple sectors related to plastic pollution. In support of this objective, the governments of Samoa, the United States, Norway, and Chile have organized a two-part series of webinars ahead of INC4. Today, we're here in the first part of the series to seek to discuss what is meant by an action agenda, as well as its role, function, and the benefits in practice under existing multilateral environmental agreements. The discussion will be led by a panel of distinguished experts and researchers sharing lessons learned and opportunities for an action agenda under the future plastic pollution instrument. Through learning about action agendas in other environmental contexts, we hope to develop a clearer vision of the most effective action agenda design to help solve the global plastic pollution crisis. The second part of our webinar series will be held in March and will invite key stakeholders in various sectors related to plastics to share their views on expectations for an action agenda under the future instrument. More information on this will follow, but please feel free to contact us using the details provided. But without further delay, please allow me to introduce our first speaker to deliver some opening remarks, Ms. Jyoti Matter-Philip, Executive Secretary of the Plastic Pollution INC Secretariat. Jyoti, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anama, for introducing me. And before I start, I would like to thank the governments of Samoa, United States, Norway, Chile, for this invitation, and also for putting together such an excellent initiative for enhancing multi-stakeholder action. Friends of the Action Agenda is a critical platform in our view to drive attention to plastic pollution issues and bring commitment for a legally binding instrument. These spaces, these kinds of spaces, reflect the importance and relevance of plastic pollution for all sectors of society. Many of you come today with a willingness to contribute and add your part to an issue that is affecting people and planet. I come from the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat, and even there we were talking in the GBF about plastic pollution under one of the targets, the pollution targets. Friends of the Action Agenda is a chance to come together and bring forth common values, passion, and promise for a pollution-free planet. I'm thankful to you, the organizers of this meeting, for facilitating more spaces for dialogue and conversation amongst the diverse group of stakeholders involved in the efforts and negotiations to develop a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, which also includes the marine environment. These dialogues can help us develop a better understanding of what is at stake and most move towards solutions. Your contributions are vastly valuable to help build bridges. We are seeing, and we are pleased to see, the growing engagement of all actors, including observers in the INC process. Throughout the sessions, the participation of observer organizations has grown exponentially. Over 500 observer organizations have been actively engaged in the process so far, and we see a rise for INC4 as the registrations are coming to a close. From waste pickers to youth to women leaders and Indigenous peoples, observers have added their voices meaningfully into all scenarios. And I'm pleased to see that the Friends of the Action Agenda is committed to ensure that these voices are heard and continue to multiply. The Friends of the Action Agenda has facilitated meaningful channels of conversation between members and observers throughout various processes. And as you know, 2024 is a critical year for the INC process, and INC4, which we are getting to very quickly, will be key to advance the negotiations. As you all may know, the advanced English version of the revised draft text of the treaty has been published on 28th of December 2023. The text reflects the work of the committee during its third session, and without prejudice for member states to propose additions, deletions, or modifications going forward. The revised draft text will be the starting point and basis for textual negotiations at INC4, which will take place from 23rd to 29th April in Ottawa, Canada. The revised draft text includes substantive provisions, means of implementation, implementation measures, introductory elements, institutional arrangements, and final provisions. So it's complete draft text. Involvement of all stakeholders will remain critical. Together with governments, civil society, academia, youth, and the informal sector, all are part of the solution. It remains imperative to encourage action by all stakeholders, including the private sector, and to promote cooperation at the local, national, regional, and global levels. We have received an unprecedented number of registrations for INC4, larger than any of the other sessions so far, which is a testament of the interest and dedication of members and observers in the INC process. And if you allow me, may I take this opportunity to remind everyone that registration for INC4 closes on 26th February, so please do register ahead of that. With that, I will say thank you to all the participants in this webinar. I deeply appreciate your passion and support to the INC process and to me, and I encourage you to keep the momentum going. We're all working together towards a shared goal. This is a chance to support one another and to ensure we build a healthier and more sustainable future for the current and future generations. And hope to see you all in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you for the timely reminder about the looming deadline for registration. I'm sure there are a few who have had their memories jolted today. Thank you also for the words, your welcoming words, reminding us about what is at stake, and also what we're here to do, which is building bridges. With that, I'm going to move on to our first speaker. Today, we have setting the stage on what is an action agenda, Professor Maria Ivanova, Professor of Public Policy and Director of the School of Public and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University. Professor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here, and I would like to start us off by sharing a few thoughts and showing some data on how action agendas work across the various conventions, but also how those of us on the other side that are not governments, that are pushing the action agendas, can and should hold governments accountable. And I would like to start by sharing with you that I am here because I study multilateral environmental agreements. And at the request of the late Bradley Chambers of UNEP, once upon a time, many years ago, we delved into the process of establishing to what extent are the multilateral environmental conventions implemented and how are they effective. So we've created an environmental conventions index, and I just want to flag briefly today that this is a foundation upon which we can build as we develop action agendas. This is our website in progress. It's not public yet. It's just for you to see what will be live in a few weeks. So we're measuring how countries are implementing environmental conventions across two clusters: on chemicals and waste with the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention, and on biodiversity, on conservation issues with Ramsar Convention on wetlands and CITES. We, as academia, are in the business of giving grades. So therefore, we can give governments a ranking, a rating, and we can create a global assessment of how countries, regions are doing on the various conventions. We have coded every single question of every single national report to these 4 conventions. And these are the overall numbers from 0 to 5 of no implementation to good implementation. And what we produce is a visual, is countries can see how are we doing on the convention. Here is a vision of the Basel Convention, and we can compare countries to each other. We can compare regions, and we can see, as you see in the Basel Convention on transboundary movement of hazardous waste, quite a few countries in the developing world are performing as they have committed to perform on their obligations. We can see how regions are performing. We can compare the various regions, and then we can dig into countries. I work with Rwanda a lot, and so I take the liberty of showing the national report card in progress for Rwanda. We have Basel and Stockholm here, not CITES and Ramsar yet. The data analysis is in progress, but we can see the national report card, but we can also see how the country has progressed or where it has challenges over time. So this I am pointing out because an action agenda needs to have the two actors, the governments and the other stakeholders. And those of us in academia, as the other stakeholders, can develop the tools, the platforms, and the ways to actually compare how countries are doing. And UNEP has been the forum where we have been coming together. We have worked with the law division at UNEP, bringing countries and delivering this information to them. And we have seen improvements. In terms of action agendas in particular, of course, and we'll hear more from Manuel today, but the Paris Agreement was the first that really mobilized stakeholders, individuals, citizens around the world. The Lima Paris Action Agenda encouraged everyone to participate. And yes, we said we must, we can, and we will. So we'll hear from Manuel where we stand on that. The Convention on Biological Diversity, and Giotti, this is, you know this world. This is also the space where an action agenda was developed and is being pushed forward. And now with the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework, we see an action agenda that is vibrant, and we see countries committing. Excuse the quality of the picture, but here, Manuel, is all of the cities that you encourage to commit to deliver climate action. And on the Biodiversity Convention website, we see a vibrant action agenda pledging platform where countries and their citizens, the businesses, can make pledges, and we see the number of pledges and organizations that are joining the action agenda. How we monitor that will be critical. And this is why I started by the Environmental Conventions Index, because while we could monitor countries, we can also monitor other pledges that are made by individuals or by organizations. The other MEAs also have action agendas. There's the Stockholm action plans for elimination and restriction of the persistent organic pollutants, the Basel Convention. They're not as articulated in the multi-stakeholder space as the other agendas, but they're really important. And to me, a real example is the Montreal Protocol. Yes, we did not have an online pledge of various stakeholders to pledge what they will do on the Montreal Protocol. However, we have very, very clear goals, targets, timelines that countries have actually met, with the support of institutional arrangements, with the support of other actors. And so the critical action agenda elements that come forth through the various MEAs are about these dozen different elements. But it's really important to have clear objectives and targets, and that's how we can monitor. It is absolutely critical to have a science-based approach and a robust stakeholder involvement. And I would like to suggest an action agenda to eliminate plastic pollution, just around 5 key issues that we could mobilize action around. One is the reduction of single-use plastics. We could reduce the production, we could reduce the single-use by simply adopting a method on demand rather than by default. Not only different materials, but that we are not given the straw or the single-use utensils by default, which often is what happens, but we do a by demand approach. We need global standards for plastics. We need to work on these international standards for the production, use, disposal of plastics, and the elimination of hazardous additives. Yes, governments have to take the lead, but industry is absolutely critical, as is academia. Civil society can and should start international cleanups and policy progress campaign. Rwanda is often given as an example of the country that has successfully eliminated plastic bags and is incredibly clean. It started with a cleanup effort. The cleanup was the first, and then followed the various regulations, laws, and their enforcement. This is where civil society can be mobilized. This is where academia, where young people can really play a role. Innovation is research are absolutely critical to any action agenda and to any mobilization of that action. So research and development for new materials, for new technologies, but also for new ways of changing human behavior. And the circular economy and the extended producer responsibility principles will be key. They're already in the agreement that is being negotiated, but this is where greater innovation for a closed loop product life cycle for producers, for consumers will be critical. And finally, I would like to suggest one part of an action agenda that we, academia, can take a leading role in, and that is to create or to launch a creative consortium, a global art and academia alliance against plastic pollution. So I would suggest that we need to foster a dynamic alliance among art, science, and policy in universities around the world so that we could drive innovative strategies to eliminate plastic pollution. That will allow us to have a global artistic expression, so not just the facts and the figures, but art to inspire us. We could teach differently, we could collaborate on research and innovation, and we can have a worldwide engagement of communities. So I would like to suggest that we create an inter-university sustainability showcase, and we ground it with a so-called plastic chairs initiative. Universities have endowed chairs. I think we may have plastic chairs for faculty to ground the research and to lead a collaboration between the visual, between mind and heart, between the visual and the emotional to actually take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ivanova, for that presentation. Very insightful and very informative. Just to note, I see that there have already been a couple of questions in the put into the Q&A panel regarding the Environmental Convention's website. So just a note to all our the participants, if you have questions for any of the panelists as we go through the various presentations today, please just add them into the pop them into the Q&A panel, and our panelists will either address them live as part of their presentations, or we have a Q&A session at the end of all the presentations. But thank you very much, Professor. Our next, given that we have a limited amount of time, I might just move along to our next speaker. We have, speaking on the Marrakesh Partnership as a multi-stakeholder approach to climate action, Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion from United Arab Emirates. Excellency, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to really also thank you, Anama, and the government of Samoa for inviting me to be part of this really important and crucial discussion on the action agenda. It is really, really interesting to start to think about now the action agendas almost coming together. So as you know, I have been, I'm here as the UN High-Level Champion for the climate change agenda. But as we discussed, we are talking not just about the plastics, not just about the climate change agenda. You see an engagement and really a convergence of agendas on biodiversity, plastics. And I think our presence today under the banner of UNEA is a testament to the convergence of the agendas that we see. And so I really will have and use my allotted time wisely. I want to take really this opportunity to share my recent experience working with the Marrakesh Partnerships and the Global Climate Action Agenda as the UN High-Level Champion for Climate Change for COP28. As Professor Maria said, Manuel, who's also here with us on the call, paved the way for the creation of the role of the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion as president of the COP20 by establishing the Lima-Paris Action Agenda. And really this was a recognition and a push from the COP20 presidency that dealing with these complex issues requires a whole of society approach. And really, again, touching upon what you said, Professor Maria, it was not just about policy and information, but also about inspiration. And that's what a whole of society approach brings to the process. This cannot ring more true today than then, because today, as we all know, half of the world's population will be going to the polls and voting. And therefore, it is really critical that the society maintains the momentum on the actions of the complex challenges that we face, because politicians, they will come, they will go, but what makes and keeps the momentum going is really the action that is happening in the society. And what I mean when we say in the society or a whole of society approach is exactly what Professor Maria was talking about. It is people, and people that make up civil society, academia, cities, states, regions, business, and investors. So really important for them to really be engaged in the process and not really be seen as an afterthought. The first champions, so I'm the 8th champion, but the first champions, 2 incredible women, Laurence Tubiana of COP21 of Paris, and Hakima El-Hatti, who was the high-level champion for COP22 in Morocco, agreed that ultimately to be able to organize this very wide societal approach, you needed a vehicle. And so what is the vehicle? The vehicle was the Marrakesh Partnership. And the Marrakesh Partnership was launched at COP22. And essentially, what did it do? It brought a unique framework for collaboration that covers the critical thematic areas for climate action. It brought together global coalitions and organizations to deliver on the global climate action goals. And it was, again, this was a topic that was brought in the introduction, it was a crucial bridge-making body between parties and non-party stakeholders. And that is essentially UN speech for everybody, the whole of society approach. As I said before, it's your cities, regions, businesses, and investors, as well as academia, with a bridge to the governments. And what was also very unique about the Marrakesh Partnership is an early onset agreement that they would deliver on the global climate action agenda under overarching principles. And the principles were principles of inclusivity, the notion of just transition, of regionalization and localization. Because ultimately, when we think about these big global challenges like climate change, like biodiversity loss, like plastics pollution, whilst there are global in nature, the actions that need to be delivered are going to be very different and very context-based. So really important when we think of the action agenda to understand the nuances and the contextualization of the local and regional agendas and players and context, geopolitically, economically, in order to be able to best implement the negotiated outcomes. The Marrakesh Partnership also was quite, I would say, businesslike. It did not necessarily just operate under sort of fluffy ideals. It established a very concise 5-year work program with very clear overarching goals. And allow me to mention them briefly. So there are 4 goals. The first one is what we've discussed, is really mobilizing non-party stakeholders to maximize ambition and action in line with credible, transparent, and science-based targets and goals. Second goal is to drive transformation through collaboration within and across sectors and within and across regions. I cannot begin to tell you how important this is. Because when you engage on climate change, and if you have such a myopic view of this is an issue of transportation, or this is an issue of the built environment, you end up really missing the ability to leverage technological, financial advancement in certain sectors if you don't ensure that there is ample collaboration across sectors, and like I said, within regions and across regions, and within sectors and across. The second is to recognize that we need to engage. The third goal we need to engage not just within the non-party stakeholders, but have the opportunity to engage within the process itself, to provide technical capabilities and advice. And everything would be moot if we don't also address the issue of accountability. So the Marrakesh partnership also ensured that an overarching goal is really focused on the notion of enhancing accountability by looking at the tools that are out there. And again, the index that Professor Maria is one of those tools that the Marrakesh partnerships would actually be very open to celebrating and advancing. So where are we today? We understood why it was established, because we need a whole of society approach. We know that the crux of the Marrakesh partnership is really to engage the society within the process. But where are we today? Really happy to report that we have gone from strength to strength. This partnership enabled the incubation of new ideas, of setting targets, of bringing various partners from across regions. And what has been a phenomenal, I think, viewpoint for me is how organic the growth has been. So it's been organic, it's been stubborn. We are here to ensure that we implement, that we're not just talking about platitudes and high-level policies, but really testing the ground bed of how these policies get to be implemented in the real economy. And what was achieved was phenomenal. We have a number of global campaigns, from Race to Zero to Race to Resilience. We've worked on 2030 breakthroughs that looked at really action-oriented, sectoral-based campaigns that have been ambitious, with clear, measurable targets for both mitigation and adaptation. We were also able to elevate key issues, not least nature, biodiversity, inclusion, and just finances within the climate change discourse. And so far, there's been a collective acknowledgement of the importance of the action agenda across all the negotiated texts since the Paris Agreement. And so what's next? We've evolved from being a sort of a body that is, I would say, thought leaders in the field. Now we are focused on really implementation. The second thing that has what is important is something that I alluded to at the beginning of my intervention is, and this was really one of my focus areas at COP28, was to push for the action agenda to really act as a catalyst for stronger alignment and collaboration and synergy between the issues of climate change, biodiversity conservation, and people, so really across the Rio Conventions. I'd like to say that the Marrakesh partnership is still evolving, but the implementation and solutions remain as keywords in 2024, alongside regionalization and localization. But in conclusion, if there are three key messages that I would like to leave with you, it would be the following. We all know that the negotiated outcomes are, at a minimum, compromises. How do we get 190 countries to agree to the highest ambition? It is difficult. And that is why the action agendas are so critical. It is really the place to enhance ambitions. And it is also the connective tissues between COPs. And it is actually what gives confidence to the parties that change is possible. And it is a test of what is possible. But second, my second message is for action agendas to really be effective, we also have to be pragmatic and we have to be inclusive and really demonstrate action. And that's why measurement is really key. If the action agenda stays aspirational, it will be an insufficient step in achieving our goals. And finally, the action agenda needs to be open. Parties need to listen to the results of the action agenda and avoid really dogmatic assessments, because implementation is hard. Implementation is complex, sometimes technologically, sometimes commercially. And so it's really important that sometimes, we say, okay, we have not implemented and it's because we did not implement. But really important to understand from the implementers where the challenges are so that policy can support, bridge the gaps between implementation and policy. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and look forward to hearing now from my brothers, Manuel and Gonzalo. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for that very precise key messages and the presentation and information that you shared. That was very useful. Thank you. Moving on to the next speaker who we've heard about from both previous speakers, we have Manuel Vidal, who will be speaking to us on the Convention on Biodiversity, the Action Agenda for Nature and People. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you, Anama. I am so delighted to be here with so committed people and friends, and also to have almost 300 participants in this important event. So it is true, it has been raised by Maria and Razan that it was in 2014, so we are celebrating the first decade, the first 10th anniversary of the Action Agenda. It was launched, the Lima Paris Action Agenda, that we can, 10 years after, conclude that it was a great decision. So let me share with you why it is so important, and also why it is so important when we are discussing what we hope will be a strong treaty to combat plastics pollution. And I have some ideas that I will try to share it with you in no more than 7-8 minutes. The first one, it is because an action agenda, it is a good way to create momentum. Remember that we did it in 2014, and it is important also to recognize that it is true, it was in Lima, but also because of the organization of the 2014 summit in September in New York, that probably had at that time the largest demonstration of people in Manhattan streets asking for a treaty, for an agreement that fortunately we got in 2015, the Paris Agreement. So we took that momentum and made it, formalized it through the COP and sent it into Paris, and that helped a lot to achieve a strong agreement that it is the Paris Agreement. But it is not just because of momentum, also it is because it is a good way to define a clear vision. And friends, sometimes we are not celebrating and recognizing that in case of climate, fortunately, we have agreed, the whole of the world, the 1.5 threshold and the net zero and resilience objective. And that is fantastic. Nobody's doubting. There could be some controversies on how to get it, but the vision is there. And in case of the CBD, also the action agenda, it has been so instrumental to move the world towards this concept of nature positive, that it is well reflected in the global biodiversity framework with clear goals and clear targets. So it is not just to create momentum, but it is to help to define that vision. But we know that vision, it is not enough. It is good to have the vision. I am used to using the analogy of the solar system to say that that vision, it is the main star. It is our sun. But it is not enough to have the sun. It is also important to have some gravitational forces that could align the actors towards implementation. And the non-state actors agenda, it is one of those gravitational forces, not the single one, because finance, science, among some other elements are also instrumental. But the non-state actors, it is key to start to align all the different actors into implementation. But also it is important to recognize that it is referred to timely implementation. Why in this case? Because in case of climate, we are in the decisive decade. We know that if we are not able to achieve our objective by now, by the end of this decade, we could have an overshoot, and we don't want to have that. So we are, by having all the actors defining clear pledges, targets, and fulfilling it, we are trying to avoid that overshoot. In case of the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, it is because we are used to saying 30 for 30. But what does it mean? That it is by the end of this decade means nothing in relation to time. We have to expand our conservation coverage probably in around 10 points in 6 years. So that is why we do need to have an action agenda, because the action agenda could accelerate those kinds of actions towards achieving our objective. But also, and that moves me to the next point, the action agenda, it is a good way to organize sectors. Because when we think about the action agenda for climate, it is clear that we are referring to energy, that we are referring to industry, that we are referring to urban or cities. So we can organize sectors. And we do need to organize sectors for the GBF, because it is important to help those sectors to define clear pledges based on clear targets and to have them fulfilling it. So to organize sector, it is key because, friends, this is an economic debate. And the only way to have this economic debate, it is by bringing and by convening all the actors into the same table. We used to think in the past that, okay, this was a political debate. It is true, it is a political debate. But now, when we are implementing, it is an economic one. And that is the idea, to make this process an economic one and to have the economy helping and supporting the achieving of the objective, but also to have the economy including climate and nature consideration as part of how the new economy is going to behave. That is a key element when we think on the action agenda. And also it is related, and fully agree with Razan, because it is about action and it is about credible action. Credibility, it is key. No, we have to avoid greenwashing, we have to avoid not accurate climate or nature claims. We have to give credibility to the system. And it is by having the action agenda, it is by having entities working in the action agenda, defining standards, validating targets, tracking progress on how well we are, that we can bring that credibility into the system. And fortunately, by now, something that Thomas is working on, we are moving this thing from voluntary basis to a more mandatory, regulated one, to say it more clearly. But it is good, because now we are in a time in which we do need to be clear on how are we planning to achieve our objective. So credibility, it is a key element. And the action agenda also, it is a good way to address political crisis. We know what happened some years ago when the US announced that they would withdraw the country from the Paris Agreement. 2 days after that, a set of strong actors from the business sector, from the academia, from the civil society, among some others, launched what it was called We Are Still In, not to show to the world that despite of a political decision, they would keep their actions framed by the process. And that was so instrumental to keep the US working towards achieving climate objective. So also it could be a political tool to continue working towards keeping the actors into good orbit or into the accurate process. And let me finish by saying that also by now it is key to have action agenda in climate, action agenda in the CBD, action agenda that, friends, it has been already recognized by the resolution in UNEA 5, the multi-stakeholders action agenda, as part of the Plastics Treaty. So it is good to have that, and it is good to coordinate, because we are in a time of promoting convergence, in promoting and defining avenues to bring our climate objective, our biodiversity objective, our pollution, control of pollution objective, all together to be more effective, mostly to the global south, because sometimes we are suffering of lack of resources. So we do need to have single action that could have multiple effects. And it is by coordinating those agendas that we could get that effectiveness. Let me finish by saying that also the action agenda, it is a good way to bring not only the political and the economic side, but the social and the moral one, because sometimes we are forgetting that this is an ethic process, and we do need to bring ethics to the process. And it is by convening actors that I am sure we could push the process to recognize those two lenses: social, the demand of people that are suffering because of nature loss and climate change consequences, but also the ethical one. How can we think, rethink, and continue working on that? Last phrase, we saw in the UAE, in Dubai, beautiful country, in a great COP, 105,000 people. Some people could say, wow, why so much people? No, it is not about numbers. It is about level of commitment. It is level of participation, level of engagement. Each one of those who participated in Dubai in COP28, it is, I am pretty sure, a multiplier of the message. And that will continue helping the process to be strengthened. So let's continue moving our actions toward a multi-stakeholder action agenda for the plastic treaty. That will be not only good for the treaty itself, for the process, and for sure for the planet. And thank you very much for this. You are on mute, Anama. We can't hear you.
My apologies. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that, but thank you very much, Manuel, for that insightful presentation and making those clear links between the policy and the need and the momentum that is needed and enhanced by having action agenda. Thank you. Our next speaker, as we move on, is Professor Thomas Hale from the University of Oxford. He'll be speaking to us today on the lessons learned from existing action agendas and how to make them effective. Thank you, Professor Hale.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll try to be brief so we can move to questions as soon as possible. As Manuel is reminding us, there's a fantastic amount of experience now, 10 years of experience with action agendas that we can draw from. And in some ways that feels like a lot of time, but of course it's very new. My research here at Oxford focuses on innovation in global governance, how we create new ways to try to solve global problems. And the action agendas have been one of the most exciting examples across any issue area of trying to build a new form of multilateralism. And so it's really important that we not just try to spread this idea to other areas and to increase our use of it, but also to learn as we go and to figure out what's working and what can be improved. So I just want to cover three quick points with you. What has been successful so far across the action agendas? What has been more challenging? And what suggestions do we therefore have for moving forward? So first, on success, I think there are three. One has already been mentioned. The mobilization of non-state actors through the action agenda has been truly phenomenal. I remember when Lima Paris Action Agenda was launching, there was some sort of initial numbers on what was then called the NASCA portal of a few thousand entities, a few thousand companies, a few cities, sorry, a few hundred, not thousand. And today, if you look at the successor to that portal, the Global Climate Action Portal, you see tens of thousands of entities represented there. And if you add up, say, all of the cities and regions that are represented, you see something like 1/5 of the human population represented. And if you add up all the companies there, you see something like $36 trillion in annual revenue. And so by any estimation, the action agenda is now a superpower. This is the biggest single chunk of emissions that we see mobilized here. And that's really non-trivial and important. Second success, I think we've really normalized the idea that non-state actors are not just kind of observers to multilateral organizations and processes, as of course they are, but they're also doers. They're also implementers and actors trying to achieve the goals that those intergovernmental processes lay out. At the beginning of this process, we saw, I think, some inertia on this idea. Some governments were uncomfortable with the idea of welcoming non-state actors to play a more active role in the delivery. In some cases, that was because this distinction between observers and actors was less clear then than it is now. So there's obvious concerns around sovereignty, which is a legitimate concern. But actually what we've seen is that there's plenty of space for governments to be deciders, of course, influenced and held accountable by non-state actors as they are through the normal channels of observers. And there's also space for non-state actors to be doers. And I think that's a really important mainstream innovation. And actually, the research shows that we don't have to fear non-state action somehow undermining or substituting for governmental action. These two things actually support each other. And that's the third success I'd point to, this idea of an ambition loop, where action by one set of actors actually creates more space, more energy, more political will, makes it easier for other actors to take action as well. And so I think we've really succeeded in normalizing this idea of an action loop, an ambition loop. So what has been the challenge? There have, of course, been challenges as well. And the one that comes to mind immediately is the same one we have for countries, the same one we have for all actors. It's the implementation gap that we now have between our targets and our goals and the actual reality that we struggle with. And so this is not in any way to blame action agendas or blame non-state actors for not delivering. National governments are in a similar position, but it does mean that our systems need to get much better at supporting implementation and delivery. And we see this, of course, in every areas. We had a study looking at all of the multi-stakeholder initiatives launched at the last 7 years of climate summits. What we found is that something like a third of them were delivering outputs that were pretty good, that were kind of in line with what they were trying to do. Another third were doing something that was maybe having some events or working toward goals, but not really quite delivering at what they needed to do. And the final third were really not doing much at all. Maybe they were simply announcements that didn't have a lot of follow-up in them. And so we see a real range of implementation there. The second challenge that I think we need to think about is how we make sure that these action agendas reach not just to the networks and initiatives and transnational bodies that are helping to bring together cities or regions or civil society, but the actual actors themselves, the grassroots people on the ground. And so obviously it's really hard for a big global process like the UNFCCC or the Convention on Biological Diversity or the new Plastics Treaty to go from this global space all the way down to the local space. And the action agendas do give us a step forward on that progress, but they don't, I think there's still more work to do to help them get all the way to make that connection really down to the grassroots level. And the third challenge I would say is that even though this whole action focus has been very helpful for supporting the implementation by bringing non-state actors into contact with parts of government that actually develop policies and put in place projects that are not just in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of Environment or the kind of traditional parts of government that are attached to intergovernmental processes on the environment, but actually to ministries of transport and finance and commerce and all the other kinds of ministries that are doing work in these spaces that are relevant for implementation, that link is still not as sharp as it could be. So how can we even use the action agenda not as a way to support implementation by non-state actors, but to build stronger links to those parts of governments that are also critical to the implementation goal? So let me end with this 3 ideas on how to support this idea, this really fantastic and innovative idea going forward. To make it stronger, I think we need to increase our thinking around how to balance updating with continuity. So we have a wonderful model where champions are appointed by presidencies and they rotate through, and this brings energy and innovation, and of course keeps a link to legitimacy that comes from the multilateral process. But of course, if you change your plan every year, it's hard to deliver some of the implementation goals, especially mobilization maybe is easier in that time frame, but actually delivery implementation takes more time. And so I think we've seen in the climate space an evolution of this, or strengthening of the champions team and the institutionalization of this. I think there's more scope to consider how to get that balance right between updating and continuity. Second suggestion is, of course, and this is a very obvious one, but it's worth saying, resources really matter. So when you have champions who have time and energy to devote to the process, when you have those champions supported by teams that have resources and staff who are able to do the work, and when you have networks and initiatives that are also full of resources to be able to support individual cities and regions, then the whole thing works well. And where you see implementation really lagging is when one of those pieces begins to fall. So it's an obvious point, but it's one that if we actually believe in the system, we need to convince governments, donors, et cetera, to really invest in making this new innovation work. And the final point, I think, where we see a suggestion for improvement, for making it even stronger, is on holding on to that idea of criteria for integrity and ambition. As I think Her Excellency Razan was saying, this is a really important distinction about the way the multilateral action agenda can be a driving force to orchestrate and bring up the sort of general ecosystem of work across this world. It has to be focused like a laser on the goals that we're trying to achieve that are legitimated by the international process. So we've seen that, for example, as an innovation in the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience, where we've set criteria that have been points to guide actors toward upward convergence. And that's an important thing to continue to strengthen as we take action agendas forward. So 3 successes, 3 challenges, 3 suggestions for our 3 fantastic champions we have here today, and a lot of good wishes for the next iteration of this really innovative approach to global governance.
Thank you, Professor Hale, for that. The 3 suggestions of each that you suggestions, challenges, and experiences, and also touching on the need or the ambition loop that you outlined in yours. These are all very interesting and key points that we're all making note of. So moving on to our next speaker, we have with us Gonzalo Munoz, the UN climate change high-level champion from COP25 in Chile, speaking to us today on the opportunities for an action agenda under the Future Plastic Pollution Instrument. Gonzalo, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Anama. And of course, I want to start by thanking the governments of Samoa, USA, Norway, and Chile for setting this opportunity, and thank our previous panelists, Yoti, Maria, Razan, Manuel, and Thomas, for bringing a lot of the main concepts that I think I would like to also wrap up somehow. As it was somehow mentioned also, I had the privilege of being appointed as a high-level champion for climate by the Chilean presidency, and I had the role of renewing that mandate for the next 5-year cycle that Razan was mentioning. We obtained that in Glasgow with Nigel Topping, the high-level champion for COP26. And what I want to refer on that sense is the importance of how much we have been collaborating between the different champions. So it has been our honor to be collaborating then, of course, with Dr. Mahmoud Moheldin, then last year and this year with Her Excellency Razan Al-Mubarak, and now Her Excellency Nigar Arpadaray. So the logic of what somehow Thomas was referring to in the importance of creating the conditions for the collaboration and the continuity of the role and the agenda is something that we have been focused on, and I think it has been working quite well. Doesn't mean that can be, of course, improved. But before starting my role as high-level champion, I was an entrepreneur, a business person. I ran a company for 10 years packing food, mostly with different types of plastics. And later I founded Triciclos, a circular economy company in Latin America, focusing on recycling with the belief that waste is nothing but an error of design that needs to be solved. And throughout those years, in both the packing sector and the waste management sector, I learned about all the difficulties and barriers that need to be solved to achieve a society that can eliminate plastic pollution. I am fascinated by what Yoti referred to as this increasing interest expressed by historic registrations and INC. That means a lot. That means that this is a context, a problem, and a need of solution that is beyond the negotiation already, right? So that means also an incredible opportunity to strengthen this treaty as one that can therefore reach all aspects of society. I love what Maria mentioned in terms of the importance of setting an action agenda based on science, based on academia, and based on tracking mechanism that will allow us to really develop somehow all those moral aspects of the agenda and strengthening the need of concrete implementation that was referred by all of the previous speakers. Both Razan and Manuel referred to the Lima Paris Action Agenda. Remember that the Lima Paris Agenda was created before the signature, the moment, the Paris moment when, of course, the member states signed the agreement. Therefore, it was also a mechanism to prepare this whole of the economy approach. As Razan mentioned, based on people that is involved properly in the process in order to bring the information, the knowledge that is required. The Marrakesh Partnership as a vehicle that is capable of properly and very strictly organize the different coalitions and the different sectors of the economy that should be ones providing information and providing implementation, bridging between states and non-state actors with inclusivity, with regionalization, and diversity, of course. Manuel referred to this logic of not only setting a clear vision, but also remember he spoke about the idea of, as it's happening in the biodiversity treatment, treaty, working by sectors of the economy, as it's happening also on the Paris on the climate agenda. And I always refer to, and I love the case and the examples of We Are Stealing as a mechanism of concretely activating the ambition loop, right? Bringing the US or maintaining the US aligned with Paris independently on who is in the government. And as Thomas also wrap up by, of course, mentioning how much of the involvement of stakeholders has been increasing in time by not only organizations, leaders that are implementing, but also doing the work and activating that ambition loop. I think that by trying to summarize what my partners have just said, it's important to understand that most of these discussions already have started in the real economy. We saw in 2016 when the New Plastics Economy report by the WEF was launched, stating not only that the oceans will contain more plastic than fish by 2050 if we don't do anything, they also created what we can define as a before and after moment for the plastic industry worldwide. We have seen a concrete movement showing that the problem is much bigger than what we can imagine, and it compromises many different actors, many different polymers, each with its own hazards to the environment and society across its life cycle. So we need to understand all of those complexities related to plastic pollution in the real economy. A polymer in one context can be perceived as harmful, while in another it can save lives at scale. We know that. And we have to recognize the differentiations, and therefore we expect we can develop a strong and ambitious agreement. We need to know in order to get there how the real world is dealing with this problem, from waste pickers to the financial sectors. This will definitely set a standard for what is currently feasible, allowing us to set an ambitious but yet feasible target. We know that there are so many stakeholders that are ready to contribute, and we hope that an action agenda can provide them the right mechanism to do so. Only that will allow us to tackle plastic pollution effectively. Thank you so much, and back to you, Anima.
Gonzalo, for a very spirited presentation. I understand that we've run a few minutes over and we won't be much longer, but thank you everyone for your patience. I'm just going to quickly share as we go into the Q&A session, how contacts for those who wish to who would wish to join or access information on the Friends of the Action Agenda. But for now, there's been a very active Q&A session happening in the queue, and we are running short of time. My apologies. So I think we will maybe have time for maybe just one question before we hand over to Lark for the wrap up. And we have the question that we do have, that I think if we could start with Excellency, the question that we had that we might work with today is, what are the best means of encouraging stakeholders to participate, but also, if possible, hold them to commitments? We could start with you, Excellency. I think maybe we'll move to, sorry, Professor Hale, if you would like to give it a shot.
Happily. So I think we've seen some interesting innovation, this idea of having, as I said, criteria against which to judge. Are you at the level of what we want to do? And criteria needn't be some sort of only sort of a gatekeeping accountability function. It's also helping to create a clear idea of what we're trying to achieve, a clear idea of what good looks like, and to, by creating that idea, to fuse it to a wider range of actors. And so an action agenda here is helpful not just as a way to mobilize action and to make sure people are delivering promises they've made, but also to inspire the broader kind of upward trajectory that I was talking about. I think we're seeing still some discussion about how best to do that. So the in the UNCCC process, we have a recognition and accountability framework consultation currently outstanding. We're waiting to hear the update from the chairs of that on how they imagine this process working forward. But there's something to this idea of having an expectation that as we pivot to implementation, you can't just put your name on a piece of paper and forget about it, but actually you're accountable in some way, even if that's through gentle transparency, forms of accountability to delivering on that. So I think creating an expectation clearly from the beginning is critical for the plastics world. And I think there's a lot you can learn from already from the experience to date in the climate and biodiversity spaces.
Thank you, Professor Hale. And my sincere apologies, we have run quite over time. There are a number of questions in the Q&A session, in the Q&A panel, which we will have the panelists address offline with two participants in one mode or another. But thank you everyone for your active engagement in this webinar. To wrap up, we have today with us Lark Williams, the lead plastic pollution negotiator for the U.S. Department of State's Office of Environmental Quality. Lark, please go ahead.
Thank you, Anima. I'm going to be very brief, but I just wanted to say we, the United States, in partnership with Chile, Norway, Samoa, really thank everyone for joining us today. Many thanks to our presenters for joining us, sharing their perspectives with us. I mean, I really took away something that's very heartening. We heard from Manuel that it's important to start action as it brings momentum to all of society. Her Excellency, Ms. Razan, talked about how this whole of society approach brings inspiration and the need for pragmatism along with openness. We heard Maria Ananova talk about the heart of this issue and this relationship between merging the science and the art and how important it is to our whole of society approach to incorporate not just our intellectual minds, but our emotional minds as well in solving this problem. We heard Gonzalo talk about how many people are already working on this now. So it really builds on what Professor Hale said about how more action, the action we already have, can beget greater momentum and greater action. So I think we are in a wonderful place on this journey of building an action agenda. And we've heard already so many great ideas that are coming forth. We have an excellent breadth of experience to draw on from other MEAs. So as we get ready for Ottawa, we just really look forward to hearing and continuing this dialogue, both in this webinar form, but in conversations with you as national governments, with other stakeholders, to continue to think about how to develop this action agenda and to make it something that will help us catalyze action towards ending plastic pollution. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Anima, back to you.
Thank you, Lark. And again, just thank you everyone for the engagement today. We really do appreciate the interest in the Friends of the Action Agenda. And again, information on how to subscribe to the mailing list or for more information is being shared. But thank you very much to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar in March. Have a good day.